Hello, and thank you for checking out this message from Grace Church San Diego. If you've never been a slave, you might assume you are free, but the truth is that we are often in bondage to the many choices we make. God has a clear answer to this dilemma. You can truly be free and embrace your best life. The series Rescued will help you to understand step by step how you can secure true freedom. We'd love to hear how Grace Church is affecting your life. Please send an email to info@gracesd.com with your story. Or if you'd like to help support our ministry financially, you can visit the website below so we can continue to help people find Christ and become His mature followers.
A couple years ago, I had my first paddleboard experience. Anybody paddleboarders? Anybody? No. You guys don't. You guys live close to the ocean. Go paddleboarding. Come on. So I paddleboarded for the first time on a lake in upstate New York, Lake Pleasant in Speculator, New York, this small little rinky-dink town. And we were staying at a camp there. And my family and a bunch of family friends, we were staying at one end of the lake, but the paddleboard rentals were at the opposite end of the lake. So it was down the lake a bit. So we were excited to get everything and rent them, and we rented a few other things and bring it down. But our plan was empty our pockets, just go in plain clothes, even though it's my first time paddleboarding, and we're going to paddle it all the way down in front of the cabin. So we did that. So I go down, I'm like, it's my first time, but I used to like skate and surf and snowboard a little bit, so I'll be fine. And so I get on my knees. I know the drill. I know how to start this thing. So I get on my knees, and I prop myself up, and I start paddling, and I'm going a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is pretty easy. So then I stand up, and I start paddling more, and I'm doing good. And pretty soon I get down the lake a bit, and I notice there was 5 of us, and I'm like way ahead of them. So I stop, and I look back, and I'm like, hey guys, like thinking I was really cool because I was way ahead of them. It was my first time paddleboarding. Right when I did that, a boat comes by, the wind picks up, and I'm like, shoot, this isn't good. The waves are coming from the boat and the wind, and I'm not paddling, so I have the paddle in my hands, and I start doing this thing. And before you know it, I fall. I tried to make the fall look cool. It didn't really work out. And then I try to recover cool. That never works out. But I get back on the board, and I'm like kind of hanging on the side, and then I get back up on my knees. And I say, okay, I just got to get back up to my feet, and I'm good. I've recovered. It'll be a story later. So I get up on my feet, and I'm stabilizing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm going to stabilize on this thing and maybe wait for them to catch up. And when they do, I'll tell them that's why I fell, just to catch up. It's not really why. And then I'll start paddling once they catch up. But I'm going to stand here to look cool. And that didn't happen. I fell again. 3 times I fall on this paddleboard. Gosh, what's going on? And then I realized, and it dawned on me. When you paddleboard, and if you have paddleboarded, you know this. It's not your stance on the board that makes you stable. It's the forward movement that makes you stable. You have to paddle in order to be stable. Otherwise, when you stand there, you can't do it. You just can't do it unless you have like huge Bigfoot feet, which I don't. It's that forward movement that brings the stability. In this series, Rescued, we've tried to give practical steps that we could take to either have others around us rescue us to be restored, or us being the rescuer. And remember, Pastor Jesse last week preached on bearing one another's burdens, Galatians 6, in bearing one another's burdens. Before that, Pastor Tim spoke on restoration and us as the rescuee being rescued. Today, I want to talk about God's intervention in that rescue, His role to play in our rescue, and how we can be rescued by the power of the Lord to free us. If you are new, I have a story for you today from the Bible. It is a true story, and it's about God's supernatural ability to rescue us. It's an amazing story. And if you aren't new and you've been around the church, you've been in the Bible for a long time, God has something for you today as well. Welcome to Grace Church. How you doing, 9:30? We're doing good. We're more awake. We've consumed large amounts of coffee, and we're feeling good. Welcome to Grace, guys. We're a safe place. We don't just say that, but it's true. We're a safe place. We say it all the time. We're a safe place that creates a safe environment where imperfect people grow. And I'm glad you're here. Welcome online campus. If you guys are tuning in, there's people tuning in from all over the country, and I have friends from Thailand actually tuning in today. So welcome you guys, and if you need a Bible, ushers will come forward and give you a Bible. We are a Bible-believing church. That means we believe this ancient book is God's inspired word to us. And we're going to look at a passage in a story in Scripture today that is very applicable in our day-to-day life, even though it's a story of supernatural power from the Lord. We're going to look at Acts 12. So we have a couple different versions of the House Bible. So it's either page 598 in the House Bible or 636. And if it's any other page, then I'm sorry, I'm super wrong. And come tell me later. Whatever. You'll find it, Acts 12. So the title of this message is Jailbreak, and you'll see why in a moment. We're talking specifically about Peter's rescue and his escape from prison. Navigating through life can be difficult for you and I. Sorry, just want to see if that's what it was. It could be difficult for us figuring out how to make life smooth sailing. And I don't know what your life has been like or what you've been through. I don't know what your life is going to be like in 5 to 10 years or even in 6 months. But I know this. Life is very imperfect because we're imperfect. We go through seasons in life where we fall. We go through seasons in life where we're hurt. And we feel stuck in those moments. We feel stuck in those seasons. We can't get out. It's impossible. Scott, there's no way I'm getting out of this. This pain that we feel, this anger, this fear is crippling us, this anxiety we're struggling with, this addiction we can't break through. There's nothing that will save me from this, nothing. We're going to look at a story how God intervened in Peter's life and made the impossible very, very possible. And I don't know about you, but I was raised mostly by my grandparents and another family, but my mom died when I was 4. My father went to prison the year after, so he was in prison most of my childhood. And I felt very indifferent from my grandparents that I was being raised by, and I felt kind of independent and different from them. So I clung to this other family and clung to my friends, and I thought only if I can make it to 18, 19, whenever I'm moving out. From there, it's going to be smooth sailing. My life is going to be good. And ladies, you know this because you're like, if I can get that white picket fence with that perfect husband and quiet children, it's going to be amazing. You know that didn't happen. In fact, you're sitting next to the husband and you know that didn't happen. And guys, you thought you were going to get that perfect career. You're career driven. You're going to make tons of money and you're going to be sailing on your yacht till you die. And that clearly didn't happen because you're here, not on the yacht. But a lot of times we look at the plan of our lives and we think, this is going to be sweet. My life is going to be, if it's not perfect, it's going to be close to perfect. And you thought your plan was smooth sailing. It was a smooth bike ride to the end. When in fact, God's plan is a little bit different, just a little bit. We get in these seasons and situations where we have tragedy, where we find ourselves on a paddleboard in a little lake and we think we're going to drown and we can't get back up and we can't move forward. We find ourselves in a storm and there's no way out. There's no way out. I want to look at a story in Acts. And normally what I do is I speak on 2 to 3 verses and we kind of extrapolate and extract the truth out of those and do exegesis, application into our lives. Today, I'm going to do more than a few verses. So hang with me. I'm going to read for you 17 verses. And I encourage you, and I think it's important to follow along. So if you have a Bible or your phone or your tablet or whatever you got, and if you get bored, fall asleep, or look on Facebook and Instagram, I'm cool with that. Doesn't hurt my feelings. So I'm going to read this to you, and I'm not going to have it on screen. So follow along with me or just hear what I'm reading. And then at the end of that, I'm going to give it some context and some history, and then we're going to talk about our steps for our rescue, okay? Acts 12:1. About the time Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church, he killed Jesus, the brother of John, with a sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews were stoked, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of the unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers, which was unusual, to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people to be executed. I said that. It didn't say that. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. That's important. We're going to talk about that in a moment. When Herod was about to bring him out, on that very night before his execution, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers. He was bound with two chains, and sentries, who were guards, before the door were guarding the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter. The angel struck him and said, "Hey, quick, get up quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. The angel said to him, "Dress yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and then follow me." And he went out. Peter followed him. He did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but he thought he was seeing a vision. In chapter 11, he talks about Peter having a vision. When they had passed the first and the second guard, the guards didn't even see him, they came to the iron gate leading to the city, and it opened on its own accord. So it just opened. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel peaced out. He left. He didn't even say bye. Kind of rude, but whatever. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel to rescue me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." Verse 12. When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name is Mark, where they were gathered together and were praying. They were actually praying for Peter because they knew he was going to be executed. And when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer, recognizing Peter's voice. In her joy, she didn't even open the gate, but she ran back in and reported that Peter was standing at the gate. And they said to her, "You were out of your mind." They didn't say it like that. I don't know why I'm saying it in that accent. They didn't have an accent like, "You were out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so. And they kept saying, "It is his angels." In Jewish culture, they had a thing about guardian angels. They believed in guardian angels. It was his angel. But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he wanted them to be quiet. He described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison, and he said this, "Tell these things to James and the brothers." And then he departed and he went to another place. It's a jailbreak. He's escaped and rescued from prison. It was impossible. It was an impossible situation, and suddenly he's out. Now, just a little history. If you're going to date night, this might win you the trivia, by the way. Here's a little history and trivia lesson. So Herod the king, there's a lot of Herods. So this is Herod Agrippa. He's not Herod the Great. Herod the Great was his grandfather. And by the way, Herod the Great was the dude that was around during the birth of Jesus. You can look at that. I think it's Matthew 2. And then he's also nephew from Herod Antipas, who had a role in the trial of Jesus, trial and execution of Jesus. That's in Luke 23. You can check that out. Now, Herod, by the way, that's a family that hates Jesus, number one. Number two, how many Herods can you have? Like, why not a Bob or Frank or something? I don't know. But it's just a lot of Herods. I just thought I'd mention that. Herod, we're going to look at Herod's motivation for doing all that he did, persecuting Christians and throwing Peter in prison and killing James. James, by the way, this also might win you, was the first apostle to be martyred. I don't know if that's part of the trivia, but if you know, you know. But what was the church doing? The church was growing. These little ecclesias, these home churches were being set up, and Peter was a leader. And they were being set up and they were growing a little bit. And with Peter's arrest and James's execution, they started praying for him. Remember that? In fact, it said in verse 5, so Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. Earnest prayer, this word is ektenos. It is intentional. It's sincere. It's a serious prayer. My son, Henry, he's 6, and the other day, I'm getting him ready for school, and he says, "Daddy, do you still have your old phone?" I'm like, "Why?" He said, and I said, "Yeah, I have it somewhere. I don't know where it is." He said, "Can I have it? I want to play games on it and stuff. Can I have a phone?" I'm like, "Henry, I don't think you're old enough. You're 6 years old. Go outside and play or something. I don't want you to have technology that much." So we started to get this argument we're driving to school. And I go, and I'm there in line to drop him off. And there's cars behind me, and he's begging and begging. I'm like, Henry, no, it's not going to happen. He's like, come on, Daddy, come on. And I'm like, listen, we're going to talk about it later. Go to school. You got to get out of the car. Everyone's like honking at me at this point. So he goes. Well, that night, I had a meeting here at church, and so he's talking to my wife about it. And he took me saying, we'll talk about it later, as if I'm still considering it. And so she took a video of him pleading with Mommy and saying, well, Daddy said that we would talk about it, but there's this video. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you probably saw this, but he's basically saying, I just think it'd be really cool to have a phone, and I like to look at the beauty in my pictures, and Daddy said we would talk about it, and I think I should have a phone. In Jesus' name, amen. He turned it into a prayer. I mean, I got to give him credit. If he's going to beg for something, at least he ends with that. Like, that's kind of cool. He's still not getting it, by the way. That wasn't even a prayer, but that's certainly not what was going on here. This was not some like flippant prayer. It wasn't some passive prayer. And sometimes like your friend will say, hey, will you pray for me? I need a wedding dress, and I'm looking for the perfect one. Or will you pray for me? I need to find a better job for more money. You're like, yeah, I'll pray for you. I pray for John that you would give him a wedding dress. Oh, wait, I got that reversed. I pray for this person. It's like a passive prayer. You know what I'm talking about. You passively pray for people sometimes, or even for your own stuff that's not that important. That's not what was going on here. Time was of the essence. Peter was to be executed the next morning. This prayer is intense. They're coming around as a church and praying for one of their leaders, praying that God would intervene. Herod had a clear motive for throwing him in prison and killing James. He had a clear motive. In verse 3, remember, he said, when Herod, saw that it pleased the Jews, it pleased the crowd when he killed James with the sword, which usually means beheading. He proceeded to arrest Peter. So he killed James. The crowd is stoked, so he takes Peter and he arrests him. That's why he took Peter. And then in verse 4, it says, when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out. Why after the Passover? Well, in those times, during Passover, it was a no-no for public executions. And he might have done it anyway, except during that Passover time, there was a lot of people making the pilgrimage over into the city that aren't Jews. They're from different cities and backgrounds and religious affiliations and things like that. So all kinds of people, and they might have been hostile towards that execution because it is a no-no. So what he was going to do is right after Passover, that next day, when only his audience are the Jews, for political advancement and popularity, he was going to bring Peter out and kill him. Herod's motivation was for the crowd, was to please people. It's important sometimes to get the detail and the context of the story and why we're reading what we're reading. There's 4 steps out of here that I want to talk about and that I want to pinpoint. 4 steps in our rescue, 4 steps that we could take from this story and apply it to our lives to have that forward movement, just like on the paddleboard, making those steps forward to our rescue. The first one, very important. I had a number of people after the last service say that I needed that today. But the first one is timing. Rescue involves timing. If you're following along in your program, you can write that in. Rescue involves timing. What do I mean? This, what I'm about to say, is very important. And maybe take a pen out and write it down next to it. Faith in God includes faith in God's timing. Understand what I'm saying here. We can have faith in the Lord and receive him, and we are saved of him. But a lot of times we find ourselves in our lives in one of those situations and scenarios where we feel stuck and we're frustrated with the Lord. I've been there. You've been there. We feel frustrated. We feel like we can't get out. But God's timing is a little different, just like God's plan that we saw earlier. God's timing is a little different than our timing, and there's a reason and a purpose behind it. Faith in Jesus can take you further than you can take yourself. You know, before I came on staff, full-time ministry, I worked in the full-time financial services. I worked for an independent broker-dealer in downtown San Diego. And then I worked for Tim on the nonprofit side for Project Reach part-time. And I did that for a long time. I did that for almost a decade. And for 6.5 years, I worked for that firm. And I was good at it. I was good at what I did, and I advanced every year, and it was good. And my wife and I would talk about it. She said, why don't you like it? Like, you're good at it. You're doing well. You like the people. Why don't you like it? Recently, our staff went through Strength Finders, if you guys know Strength Finders. And my number one is belief. That's my number one strength. So that means with anything that I do, I have to find meaning in it. I want to be a part of like helping people, and I have to have meaning and purpose into what I'm doing. Otherwise, I want no part in it. I'm out. I'll be feeding people down there or whatever. But for 6.5 years, I worked there. And the whole time, every year, for about 10 years, Pastor Tim and I would meet. We said, this year we want to accomplish this through Project Reach. And with my limited capacity, we would set some goals and do it. And every year, I'd be like, Tim, imagine what we could do. I'm a dreamer. I'm like, look at what we can do if I come on full time. He said, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year. 10 years. I'm getting frustrated with God. I'm like, all right, dude. Sorry, I said dude. All right, Lord. If you want me to do this, what I think is my calling, can you give it to me? Please. Like, I'm begging you at this point. And for years it went that way. It was so frustrating for me. I wanted it now. In June of 2014, our company was acquired by a bigger company, and everyone was scared. We're going to get laid off. Well, in October of that year, I had an executive call me in his office, and he said, he was a friend of mine. He said, Scott, I'll get fired if you repeat this, but your group in IT is going to be laid off in February. It's a phased layoff approach. And it was like, oh, shoot. I'm a stability guy. So I go home, and I tell Susan, and we were talking about it. We said, let's not do what we always do. Let's not freak out. It's usually my MO. It's usually what I do. Let's not freak out. Let's just pray about it, give it to the Lord. I'll get my resume together, look for opportunities, and God is going to provide. And we declared that night. The next morning, I hadn't talked to Tim in a couple weeks. Tim texted me at 6:30 in the morning. He's an early riser, and I am too. He said, hey, can you talk? So 6:45, we're on the phone. He said, now's the time. We can afford you. We have someone going off staff. Now is the time. Do you want the job? It's a full-time job. So I'm so excited. I'm like on cloud nine. So I call Susan. I said, okay, let me talk to Susan. I'll call you back. So I call Susan, and I said, hey, do you have a second? She's getting the boys ready for school. It's about 7:30 at that point. And she said, yeah, but I had the craziest dream that Tim offered you a full-time job. And I said, shut up. And I said, he just offered me a full-time job. And she said, shut up. So we told each other to shut up. So we had that going on. Don't tell your wife to shut up. Just like that, it happened. It was like out of a movie. I'm like, I can't make this stuff up. That's crazy. Just like that. It was God's timing. And in retrospect, looking back, those 6.5 years at that firm prepared me for everything I'm doing here. It's amazing. I'm like, why am I here? Why am I here? Every year I'd say that. Now on the business side at Grace, being the business manager, everything I did there has prepared me to do this. And I'm like looking back and I want to slap myself. Like, why did I doubt God's timing? It was perfect, impeccable timing. Little faith can accomplish great things in a great, mighty God. God's timing. In verse 6, remember it says, now when Herod was about to bring him out on that very night before Peter's execution, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the guards before the door were guarding the prison. God's timing was impeccable. The night before the execution, he intervenes. That night. We want God to perform for us. We want relief right now. But it's God's timing. God's timing. We need to have faith in his timing, not just faith in him as a whole. His timing is perfect. Notice also the impossibility in this scenario. It seems impossible for him to get out of this prison. He's in between two soldiers. There's a dude there, there's a dude there. He's shackled to him, a chain here and a chain here. Two soldiers, two chains. And there's guards at the door, and then there's a gate. There's no way he's getting out. No way. It's impossible. But you'll notice in your life, if you take those steps in faith, God turns the impossible and makes them possible. He turns the impossible and makes them possible, but not on our terms, on his terms, if we just place our faith in him. Step 2, rescue involves community, it involves people, it involves us, you and I, you and me and you, whatever. It involves all of us, it involves the church. I actually think a lot of social issues today can be resolved right here in the church, by us taking care of each other. I have a friend who comes to church here she has suffered the ultimate tragedy of losing a close family member. And man, my heart hurts for her. But to see this church respond to her is amazing. There's a number of people going through stuff. And to see how you guys respond, like bring them meals every night. There's like a schedule of who's coming over and praying for them and giving them a meal. It's awesome. It takes community. And guys, stop being an island. You can't do it alone. Because I know me, when I've done stupid stuff or I'm going through something, I withdraw. And a lot of you do too. And it's funny, I don't mean to just sing a lot, guys. Some women are like that too, but women, their heart and their head are more closely attached sometimes. They can express those things. Sorry if that offended you. But it takes community. It takes us praying for each other and being there for each other. What was the church doing? They couldn't go bust him out, but they were praying for him. The connection with God is what mattered. I once met a young girl in northern Thailand. I'm not going to say her real name. We're going to call her Anna. And Anna lived in Mae Sot, Thailand, in a little Muslim village. And her father was a drug addict. And her mother had died. Her siblings had died coming out of Burma into Thailand. And Anna, her father sent her out to the streets to beg. That was her job. No school, nothing. She was, I think, 9 or 10. And so she would go out. And our partner organization, if you guys don't know, we as a church support Compasio, Thailand. Compasio is an amazing organization there that we send people every year. So Compasio noticed her on the street. And I met her one year. And they noticed that she was always smiling, but on her feet were these marks, were these burns. Her father, if she refused to beg, or if she came home with little money, he'd take a knife and put it in the fire and then put it on her feet and her legs. And he was abusing her. Compasio saw it, met with the elders of the Muslim community, and was able to rescue her. They took her and held her in the safe home in a loving environment and taught her all about Jesus. They then went after the father in love, got him counseling. He got out of drug addiction, and now they're reunited. An amazing story of how community came together to rescue this little girl. Here at Grace, we have awesome, we call ourselves a church of second chancers. A lot come from being burned at other churches, or, you were chastised at another church because you went through a divorce or whatever you went through, and you're loved and safe here, so you come here. But we have amazing stories and testimonies of people that were stuck in something, that were held in a prison of something, and were rescued. I'd love for you to watch a testimony by John. John, you'll see him playing bass a lot of times up here. John Saccone, he's an awesome guy, and I want you to check out his testimony.
I grew up in a hardcore Roman Catholic neighborhood, so I wanted to be a priest. Like in my neighborhood, you either wanted to be, in the first grade, you wanted to be a fireman, a policeman, or a priest, a Catholic priest. And then, in the 60s, early 70s, you had that whole Catholic pedophile priest thing that just the whole church-wide, the whole Catholic Church was rocked by it. And, a lot of kids got caught up in that. And as a result, I ran away from Christ as fast as I could. I'm going to be over here. I think I'll be like an atheist alcoholic now. Because I don't want anything to do with Christ. And that was pretty much, that typified most of my adult life spiritually. Without going into a whole lot of detail, I decided to stop drinking. And I took a week off from work. I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to tough it out. I'm just going to quit cold turkey. It turned out to be a mistake. Because, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not 30 years old. At the time, I was 55. and I had a severe reaction to alcohol withdrawal. Had a come to Jesus moment. I was in a bad space. I mean, physically, I was in, heart palpitations, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I started praying, and just the whole notion of an atheist praying was crazy. The next day, I met somebody, had a 12-step meeting, who told me about Grace Church. That was on a Saturday. The next Sunday, that very next Sunday, I came to Grace Church. Realized that what had happened to me when I quit was I'd actually gotten saved. I didn't even realize it. My life had been so spiritually void. Here Jesus comes into my life. I didn't even realize it. There's a point where you hit a bottom where you have absolutely nowhere to turn. And the cool thing about turning to Jesus at that moment is some people want to think, oh, you just turn into Jesus when you have nowhere else to go. That's okay with Jesus. And that's okay. And that's actually when he wants you to come find him. And so that was a moment when I realized, okay, I sought him out. I called for him. He answered. There's a sense of peace that I have that I've never had. And, this is the first time I've ever been in a church, okay? Most of my life, I've never been to a church. I've never been around church people. My opinion of Christians I didn't want anything to do with them before. I hated Christians. As far as I'm concerned, they were the ones that ruined my life. They're the ones that sent me into the bottom. So now, here I am on the other side, and this is where some of the most peaceful and compassionate people I ever met are at this church.
It's awesome. John Saccone, in his own prison of disbelief, addiction, running away from God almost all his life. And he finds Grace Church. He finds Jesus, though. He finds connection with the Father. Did you notice what he said? I called for him, and he answered. What did the church do? The church was praying for Peter. They were calling on him to intervene, and he answered. Herod had his soldiers, he had his prisons, but the church had the power of prayer, the power of that connection with God, that connection with the Lord, with the Father. Step 3 is connection. Connection with who? Connection with God. Knowing him. Peter was in a deep relationship, an intimate relationship with the Lord. He depended on him. He was resting in him. Notice he was sleeping the night before he was executed. That seems crazy to me. I don't think I'd get much sleep if I know I was going to be beheaded the next day. It seems absurd. He had intimate connection with God. John found connection at his bottom. Where did you find yours? Or maybe you haven't yet. Everyone hits times in their lives. I was talking to a staff member last week, and she says, a lot of you guys on staff, everyone on staff has this story, and you made tons of stupid mistakes, which is true, and you have these crazy stories, and I don't have any of that. None of that. And I said, well, you should start training for the trials that you're not in yet because they're going to come. And in everybody's life, you've had some trials already, I know you have, but if you haven't, and even if you have, there's more coming. Will you have that connection with the Father? You know this if you're married or you're in a serious relationship. When you're connected with your spouse, you're good. You're good because if financial struggles come or something happens, there's tragedy with family members, you're good because you have that strength to draw from. You have that connection to draw from. In this last year and a half of being on staff, I've had faith for a long, long time, but my faith has grown as I've taken steps in my faith in connection with God and being more bold in my faith. I've seen God move like I've never before in the last year. I've seen God move in the last year more than I have my entire life. I love this quote by St. Augustine. It says, faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you do not believe. I love that. Through that connection with your spouse, it makes you solid. You have a foundation. There's strength and power in that. When you have connection with God the Father, there's strength and that foundation gives you power to overcome. It gives you power to be rescued. Step 4 involves that power. I'm one of these guys, my wife always says, you put God in a box. And I say, whatever. And she's kind of right a little bit, but some of you might disagree with me. But sometimes when I see a televangelist on TV and they're healing people and there's like a line and they're like going, boom, and you're healed, boom, and they're like hitting people, it's weird. There's a little skepticism that rises up. I'm sorry if I'm offending you, I love you. But not that I don't think God can do those things. I have an issue, and I'm ultra sensitive to obligating God to perform for me. And so if I call you up, who's got a bum leg, I'm going to heal you real quick. I am obligating the Lord to perform, to heal that person. And so sometimes I go, and my wife says, don't put God in a box. He could do that. I know he could do that. This one time in my life, I saw God heal someone. It was a couple years ago only. I live in Alpine, and 20 minutes out in the mountains, my brother-in-law lives there, and we were having dinner one night, and his neighbors who come over often, Bob and Sandy, they come over on their horses. And we put the boys up, and we walk around, my kids, and it's fun. And they came over this one night, and one of the horses was acting a little crazy. And so I took my son off, and Sandy goes, I'm going to go run it out of her. She's a little jittery and acting up. So we said, okay. So she takes off around the corner on the dirt driveway. Suddenly, we just see the horse running without Sandy. And we're freaked out. So we run around the corner, and we see Sandy's body laying there. Her body is contorted. Her neck is completely sideways. Her eyes are wide open, but she has labored breathing. And my mother-in-law, who's been a nurse for almost 30 years, we all run up on her, and she says, oh my gosh. She checks her vitals and stuff. She's getting weak. I think she's dying. And she said, we called 911, and they're on their way, but it takes a little while to get up the mountain. Let's just pray. So my mother-in-law starts praying. She's a strong believer. And she starts praying, and she prays for a couple minutes, and right at the end, she says, if it is only your will, I pray that you would heal Sandy and make her come to us right now. Boom, Sandy's eyes open again, and she goes, hey, what happened? She comes to. And I'm blown away because God went outside my box. And I'm blown away at God's power in that moment. I had never seen that before. I've never seen that. It's amazing what God can do with connection with the Father. That's how we get that power. That's where that power comes from. Our rescue, our delivery can come in different forms and different ways, right? You know this. You might not see God intervene in a miraculous way with an angel saying, wake up, we're out. He may not heal your family member or you like he healed Sandy. He may come subtly. He may come and rescue you by a friend, a family member, by the prayer of the church. But our ultimate rescue does come by him. It does come by him. Last week, last couple weeks, we introduced those rescue cards. And if you didn't fill one out last week, I encourage you to do that. Take that out and mark it on there, what you need to be rescued from. We're going to display that and show how God's moving and rescuing us in the next coming weeks. I encourage you to do that. And if you did, you don't need to do it. If you're new to church, to God, to Jesus, to this Christian church weird thing, I want you to know something. And even if you do know him, I want to remind you of something. That there was a man named Jesus who boldly and intentionally walked into Jerusalem one day. And he knew what was coming. He was here, he was on a mission. He knew he was coming for you and I. He knew that he would be persecuted, tried, found guilty, killed, crucified on a cross, and laid in a tomb. He knew that torture was coming, that his humanity would be screaming out. He knew what was coming. He knew he had to pay that price for you and I. But Christians and churches, we always say this: on the third day, the tomb was empty. They rolled away that stone and his body wasn't there, but the tomb was not empty. Hear me, because the tomb was filled with something, and it was filled with hope for you and I. It was filled with the belief and the knowledge and the truth that you and I can be rescued from whatever we're going through. We put our faith and our belief in him and our trust in him. If you've never accepted Jesus Christ, you can right now where you're at. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've seen or what you've been through. You have that ability. He loves you right where you're at. Let's pray.